All right, thank you so much. I would also love to chat with you about these tools. I'm probably the person you might want to talk to about some of those mappings. So next up, we have someone that is going to be addressing an uncomfortable reality that a lot of people stop their coverage mapping at the technique level and just call it a day. I know no one in this room does that, but someone online might be doing that. So our next speaker is going to be explaining why that approach really doesn't work and why procedures are kind of like the real threat-informed, that's where the real threat-informed defense begins, and how clearer mappings can actually kind of fix what vague mappings broke. And some of you know how passionate I am about procedures, Lauren. So I'm excited about this topic. So if you've ever stared at like an attack coverage chart and said, this feels like lying, except for with color coding, then this presentation is for you. Please welcome Billy Purnell. He's a cyber threat operations manager at Lloyd's Banking Group.
Today, I'm Billy Purnell, a cyber threat operations manager at Lloyd's Banking Group. If you're not familiar with Lloyd's, it's a large UK-based financial institution, and I'm a career blue teamer with over 10 years experience across incident response, threat intelligence, and detection engineering. I came to ATT&CKcon last year as a guest and left thinking I need to share how we are operationalizing attack and get feedback from the community. So here I'm going to talk to you about the unloved P in TTP and why procedures can be a key to unlocking attack. So we've heard earlier, you can be inundated with threat intelligence reports and struggle to prioritize which to pick up first. And then even when you do, you find that they're talking about the same threats that you read last week or the week before. Or worse, you read about a critical threat and you struggle to answer your CISO's question. What does this mean for our business? Procedures can be a step to trying to answer some of those questions. Because techniques are great, but they're often misleading. Not they're often misleading, sorry. Techniques are great, but they can be quite general sometimes. And it's procedures that really contain the data on how an adversary achieves their objective. And it's that level of detail which allows us to unlock attack. So there are two problems biting us at Lloyd's. First was prioritization. As we heard earlier, you can be inundated with threat intelligence reports which are warning us about the ever-evolving threat landscape. And then when you read it, you find that actually it's just repeating the same information. Or your business attack surface is growing because they're investing in new technologies. So we need better ways to prioritize our work. And procedures can help with that. The second was misleading heat maps and coverage information. Because when I read an intelligence report, I want to know what that means for my business and what I can do to help defend it. Technique heat maps can be useful, but they are often misleading. If we say we cover a technique, what does it really mean? For example, if we have one detection that alerts when someone uses PowerShell to delete a volume shadow copy, is that technique really covered? What about all the other ways an adversary can use PowerShell? So we can use procedures to help address some of these challenges. So what we did at Lloyd's Banking Group is we came up with a consistent way to define procedures. We store them in a graph database, and we link those procedures to technologies and controls in our environment. We started this work in 2019. To be honest, our first attempt became a bit of a mess. People were defining procedures at wildly different levels. And this is a challenge I see in threat intelligence reporting. It can be too high a level, like an adversary use scheduled task for persistence. It's nice as a note, but it's difficult for detection engineers or someone trying to do adversary simulation to make any use of it. Or it was too low level. So every registry run key value pair is a separate procedure. In our data model, that had great use, but it just didn't scale. So our first solution was to come up with a consistent procedure definition that would work for us. So I could talk for the next 50 minutes about procedure as code, so I'm just going to touch on it quickly. But here, we took three things to combine the procedure name. So we have the how, the effect, and the objective. And I'll show an example of this on the next slide. So the how is an action mechanism that causes that procedure to happen. The effect is what changes or breaks because of that action. And the objective is the adversary rationale for employing that procedure, almost linking back into the tactic. But the key for us to unlock attack is taking those procedures and mapping them to technologies in our environment, to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and then to threat actors in software. And it's those relationships which allow us to prioritize better. So as promised, here's an example. It's a little bit off in the colors, but this is an example of a procedure from our database for registry run key. So you can see the how is using native binaries. The effect is to modify auto-run or startup registry keys. And the objective is in order to gain persistence through starting the target code or malware at startup. So that's the procedure name. We then link it to the two techniques that it's related to. So we've got modify registry and the sub-technique registry run keys. And then the key for us is mapping that to technologies. So these are all Windows artifacts, and these are just a couple of examples. So reg.exe and regedit.exe, and the registry keys that it can impact. Now, as I mentioned, its procedure is code, and that's because we extract that from our intelligence report in JSON format, so it's fully machine readable. And as you can see, we capture a lot more information than just the name and some of those relationships. Now, you might be looking at that and thinking, do you really have the time to read reports and write them for every procedure that you see? And that's why, for us, generative AI has been a key unlock in this approach. So it's absolutely not perfect, but it gets us about 80% of the way there in extracting that procedure. So we'll take the report, extract procedure as code for all the procedures that we've got, and then that allows the analyst to validate that those procedures as code make sense. It's not hallucinated, it's not missed something, but then start focusing on the meaningful part of the role, which is what do those procedures mean to our organization? Have we seen those procedures before? Are they new, or are they just adding to our existing knowledge base? Now we've got those procedures as code. What do we do with them? And that is where we use a Neo4j graph to store that data. Just making sure you could actually read that. Maybe a bit difficult towards the back. But we use Neo4j because it's the relationships between the entities that matter. And as you can see, in the middle of our example schema here, you've got the procedure node. As you can see how important that is at linking the data model together. So on one side, you have elements like the threat actor and software, which allow you to prioritize those procedures based on targeting and other useful information, and then into the attack framework, which can really help with control mapping. We then, and this is key, take the technology, assets, and applications from our organization's configuration management database. So that's a representation of all the technologies our organization uses. We pull that into the graph, and we link that to the procedures. So that allows us to map those procedures to the technologies that we use and how important they are for our business. And then the last thing is we map that to controls. Now, this is really difficult to do. We're not there yet by any stretch of the means. And that is mapping controls on a procedure basis to assets and technologies. So what that allows us to do when a new intelligence report lands is we can see, what does this procedure mean for us? Is it something new, or is it something that we've seen before? Does it impact technologies in our environment? Are any of those technologies tier 0 or business critical? Are we aware of any controls for that procedure? Or do we need to go and investigate if we've got a control that would mitigate that? And all that can help drive other work like detection work, adversary emulation work. So 3 of the key unlocks in this approach is that, first of all, as I talked about, we've got prioritizations. We're moving beyond the threat actor headlines and really focusing on the procedure element of the reporting. That helps if you've got big, long reports with 40 procedures, 50 procedures in them. Once you've extracted them, you can see what is it that's new, what is it that you already know about. The second is that we're getting better coverage clarity. Because we're moving beyond technique level mapping and into procedure level mapping, we're able to understand where we've got gaps. As I said, this is very much a work in progress, but it's something that it has unlocked some useful conversations within the team. And the third bit is fastest adversarial modeling. Because we've got the procedure and how it impacts our technologies and how important those technologies are to our business, we're then able to also look at those controls and prioritize effectively. So as I said, we've been doing this for a number of years now. It's been a bit of a long journey, and we've made a lot of mistakes, and we've still not overcome everything. So a couple of things so that you don't make those mistakes. First of all, for our data model, we had to define procedures consistently. So that was making sure up front that we had a definition per technique. The second is that the AI makes mistakes, right? You've got to keep a human in the loop to review the output. And the third is that control mapping is really difficult. We've not found a good way of doing it so far. We've got some good use cases for it, but it's something that we're continuing to work on. I'd just like to note that there are some solutions coming online which are trying to address some of these questions and challenges, like Tidal Cyber, who I was having a conversation with earlier. So it is a useful approach, but we've still got to keep working at it to get there. So a couple of key takeaways from this presentation. If you can, capture procedures over techniques, because it's the procedures that are really going to tell you how an adversary is impacting and achieving its objectives. Map those procedures to technologies in your organization. You can start with something simple like Excel, or if you've got a threat intelligence platform that can help you do that, that can be useful as well. But in our case, we found graph scales so much better. And that this is a foundation for future work as we see it. Once you've got a good understanding of procedures, you can unlock a lot of future potential. So we're looking at how you could potentially do adversarial emulation based on those procedures in an automated fashion. So that might help us get through that control challenge where we don't have complete understanding of those controls. We can test those procedures and get actual telemetry and data about how effective those controls are. So yeah, just for a wrap up, a message to any Intel vendors in the room, keep sharing procedural level detail, because it is that level of detail which helps teams like mine operationalize your work. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Billy. Yes, Ivan.
So one of my worries in the past about using procedure level was it turning into a laundry list. Do you see a pattern like where it's kind of like what we talked about with techniques, right? After a while, it stops just adding random techniques. Do you see a pattern with procedures like that, or do you start getting that laundry list problem where they're just adding up?
You do end up with, oh, sorry.
So the question was, and when you're mapping it procedures, do you end up getting a laundry list that you have to process?
I mean, that's a challenge, isn't it? Because if you start with tactics, then you get techniques, then you get procedures, that list keeps growing and growing. So I guess a couple of things. If you focus on the procedures that you're seeing more often, that kind of procedure prevalence, that can be a good place to start, because you're not going to be able to cover absolutely everything you've got in your organization. So if you focus on those, that can help. We also splice the data by technique sometimes, because then you can actually, if you're thinking about detections, look at the robustness of that detection, right? What detection is going to cover the most procedures and get you the biggest bang for your buck? And the last part is that if you're just using it as well for just intelligence reports coming in, you can focus on the procedures in that reporting. So that is a bit of a step up, but I totally get your point. The more data we've got, sometimes it can be a bigger challenge to work out what you process first and handle. So good question, Ivan.
Yes, in the back.
Similar question, how do you standardize procedures? So like how do you square finding a procedure that's written one way by vendor A, finding the same procedure that's written a different way by vendor B, and sort of figuring out like, oh, these are actually the same procedure?
Yeah.
How do you standardize procedures that come from different sources and look different in their original state, but then you have to deduplicate them?
Yeah.
How do you do it?
That's a great question. Sorry, I'm getting too excited. I'm trying to answer the question before you can ask it. Yeah, it is a big challenge. So we use generative AI to try and help with that. And that's where we've had to define the level of procedure at a technique level. Because as you say, if you're starting to look at techniques that are reported differently, you need to pull them to the same level of abstraction. So that's where we found procedure as code helpful, but we've had to agree it per technique. And that ends up causing a lot of debate in the team, right? What level do you pitch the technique? I think the problem is why we haven't necessarily addressed it as an industry, is it's quite difficult to define what a procedure actually means, because it means so many different things to different people. So this is our answer to try and define it for us, but open to feedback and understanding from the community if there's any better ways to do it. We're all ears for sure. Great question.
Thank you, Billy.
Great. Thanks, guys.